Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the support on the recent episodes. We are down to like a handful of NBA teams left in the Eastern Conference. So, with that being said, we do have a trade related to the Damian Lillard trade. So we are going to take care of that first. But before we get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and X at the OBT Podcast for updates.
Yeah, so we're gonna kick it off. So, last episode we had the big Damian Lillard trade. Um, obviously that sent shockwaves and ripples around the NBA, right? With Lillard going to Milwaukee.
Mm-hmm.
Um, of course, Drew Holiday going to Portland, right, along with DeAndre Ayton, as well as picks. And then after that, right, you had Phoenix get roped in there, right, with Yusuf Nurkic, Grayson Allen, Nasir Little going over to Phoenix. And now, the conversation that we had, before was, well, where's Drew Holiday going to go? He doesn't fit in Portland because, he's more of a veteran guy. He belongs at a contending team. And we talked
Sure.
about all the different types of teams that would be really interested in him that he could help. And one of those teams was Boston. And, as it turns out, that is the team that he is going to. So he, now is officially a Boston Celtic. So, we can take a look at that trade now,
Yeah.
right?
It's
So
a big deal.
basically, yeah, and it is a big deal. So, because this kind of completely, shapes the or reshapes the roster for Boston. And this turns the Portland deal into a great haul, but first into an even better haul. But we'll look at the Boston side first. So Drew Holiday heads to Boston. They gave up Robert Williams, Malcolm Brogdon, a 2024 first round pick from Golden State, which is top four protected, and then an unprotected first round pick from Boston in 2029. So, obviously, Drew Holiday coming to Boston, that's a big deal because, that's type of player, was kind of a weakness for Boston, right? In the sense of they didn't really have, a point guard who could kind of, settle things down and kind of set the table. And even though that's
Sure.
not his natural forte, he is, a better, point guard, than, a decent chunk of them, right? And
Yeah.
essentially he's Marcus Smart's replacement. And I think he's a much better player than Marcus Smart,
Absolutely.
particularly on the offensive end. Again, playoffs, he does have a drop off on offense, but in the regular season, if you look at his stats, they're normally very good. He's
Yeah.
generally somewhere around 50%, somewhere around 40% from three.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so in terms of what Boston is getting, right, you're getting, a really good two-way guard, at that point guard spot, to kind of round out that starting five, right? Because, now they've kind of sacrificed depth, for a much stronger starting five, right?
Sure.
And, now when you kind of look at it now, with that lineup, I'm assuming Derek White still starts, if I had to guess, because they've been
Oh, you
talking
think
about
so?
him only because, he was named the starter. So I'm gonna assume he's still gonna start, and he could
Okay.
just start alongside Holiday.
Yeah.
And so now you have Holiday, White, Tatum, Brown, and then Porzingis, right? And then I guess Horford, ends up being the backup big.
Yeah.
Only because the weakness here from that deal is now you don't have as much depth from that big man spot because you gave up
Sure.
Robert Williams. But again, the issue with Williams and Brogdon is that, those guys never play. Even though Porzingis isn't necessarily the, spitting image of availability either, those guys, are just, not quite as good, So
Right.
I think they're making a talent play, to upgrade. And again, they made a lot of changes. They made their team bigger, right, with more size because they were, kind of an undersized team that preferred to play small,
Mhm.
especially to close out games. Um, but now they got a pretty big team because Holiday's a big guard. And then obviously Porzingis is a big center, even though he, is not the most physical center. He is 7'3". But it also again gives you five guys in that starting five that can all give you some type of offense in different ways, right? They can all kind of attack. They can all shoot well. They all move the ball.
Sure.
So, from that perspective, it seems like Boston's loading up, and that kind of puts them, in a way on a collision course with Milwaukee, right? It certainly pushes them, over teams like Philly, and Cleveland and teams like that,
Yeah.
So the East kind of, for now is going to run through those two teams, and those two teams, I think, it's kind of interesting where like, their strengths are kind of each other's weaknesses, right? Like when
Sure.
you look at Milwaukee, you know, their guards aren't necessarily great defensively. They're a little bit smaller, whereas Boston's guards are, bigger, more physical, and really good on the defensive end.
Mhm.
Of course, Boston doesn't have a Giannis, right? That's kind of a real cheat code in terms of being able to play downhill, and play off Lillard. But then you look at Milwaukee; they don't really have the wings to match up with Tatum and Brown. So both teams kind of, like I said, match up pretty well against each other. It just kind of comes down to health for these guys, right? Because again, similar to Milwaukee, the injury concerns with them, you have injury concerns with Boston as well, right?
Mhm.
Holiday misses time, Porzingis, of course, misses time. Obviously Tatum and Brown are relatively durable, but still, then you factor in Horford, his age. Is that a guy maybe you look to maybe move at the deadline? They just kind of added, I guess, Winyan Gabriel as a camp invite, right? But he can't be your only option as a potential backup big. You got to have,
Right.
I think, a little bit more stability than that, at least in the postseason. But either way, I like this trade a lot for Boston. I think it's a really good fit. Like I said, I think you did give up some depth here, but again, it's depth that's not always available, right? Because Robert Williams and Brogdon, even in the playoffs, we're not, always a lot to play.
Sure.
And again, like I said, I think Boston is going all in, and it makes sense because you got Tatum and Brown, and that's a really good starting point, as a contending team. And now it's kind of up to Tatum, I think, to kind of take that next step, as a young superstar in his development, because if he, can take another level forward and kind of reach that point where everybody's like, this guy's an undisputed top 5 player, right? That's going to make Boston really difficult to beat. He'll have to get there, and he probably can because he is, again, he's young. He's still accomplished a lot for
Yeah,
his
he's the
age. But
next
right,
player up to win a title for sure. I think a lot of
yeah,
people would agree,
exactly. So
alongside probably Luca.
right. So, like I said, I like this for Boston. I think it makes them better. Like I said, it is a gamble, it is a risk, because you are giving up depth. But I do think the talent upgrade, I don't have an issue with it because I think they needed a guard like that. And now losing Marcus Smart, you don't feel as bad because you got Drew Holiday, who I'd rather have than Marcus Smart. He already was on a team that won a title and was a big part of that, right? He was one of their best players,
Yeah.
from start to finish,
Yeah.
for Milwaukee. Now you got to also factor in he's going to have a chip on his shoulder as well because he was traded from Milwaukee, because they wanted an upgrade, and now he's going basically across the hall, to the other best, to the other really good team in the Eastern Conference, and he has got a chance to knock him out. So we'll see what happens. But like I said, I don't have a problem with this at all. I like it. Like I said, I have questions about depth, but there is no perfect team, and I think this is about as good as you could do if you're Boston. You basically turn Robert Williams, Marcus Smart, Malcolm Brogdon, you turn that into Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis. Those are two really good players. And
Sure.
I think if they can, buy into their roles, right, which, I've seen Holiday do, we'll see if Porzingis can do that. They can go really far. Because again, with Porzingis, it's one thing for him to be, the second best player in Dallas. But now, you could argue he's the third or even fourth best player on that team, and now these guys are slotted into roles that I think they'll be more comfortable with. So, like I said, I think this is a home run for Boston. And I think this makes me reevaluate their offseason because I liked what they did for the most part in the offseason, but now I like it even more from their perspective.
Yeah, it boosts it for me too. I was already at the A tier grade, but it's probably going to go to an A plus after that because it's a, like you said, phenomenal win now move. Love to see it. I really like it for Boston. I actually even really like it for Portland too because I mean, they get to keep Robert Williams, and pair him with DeAndre Ayton. I think that's really cool. And then, I feel like they're also in a interesting situation where they have some valuable players. Brogdon, I feel like could be traded again. That wouldn't surprise me because I don't really think they would want to keep him. Um,
Right.
but they could also keep Brogdon and then move on from one of their other guards, maybe like Simons or something like that. So I feel like they have like a ton of flexibility here, and I think the haul that they've gotten for Lillard has been beyond what Miami could have given them. So I definitely
Yeah.
understand what the process was here, and I love to see it. So it seems like they do have some things to look forward to. And then it also looks like there's some picks as well involved. So that's
Right.
pretty good as well. You'd always love to see first round picks go to teams that are in the rebuilding stages. So I can't really be mad at any of this stuff. Like I said, great win now move, and definitely one of the most underrated trades I think in recent history.
Yeah. I think, if anything, this kind of shows, that with Portland, the patience paid off. Because at the time, when we didn't necessarily know that a team like Milwaukee was going to try to angle to get Lillard,
Hmm.
a lot of people, were kind of saying like and thinking like, why don't they just, do this trade? Nobody else is going to bite. Nobody else is going to bite. But if, another team did bite and, we talked about it when, they pulled off the trade and we were saying like, Drew Holiday, you could probably get a better return for him than Tyler Hero,
Oh
because
yeah,
we
yeah,
knew obviously, once they traded for him, they were going to flip him because I think most teams, and I think us as well, right? I think most people would say Drew Holiday is probably a more valuable player. Well, not
Yes.
probably is a more valuable player
Yeah.
to more teams than Tyler Hero, right? Because again, it's not that Hero's bad. It's just he's primarily a scorer on a long-term deal. He is young, so he can always get better, of course. But again, just guys that are primarily scorers, do have some limitations at times, and we've seen it in the playoffs where he's typically not been quite as good as he was in the regular season. And again, Holiday does drop off in the playoffs as well,
But
but
he's a champion
because
though.
of his yeah, yeah, exactly. But because of his defense, and his leadership and all that other good stuff, I think that still makes him a more valuable player in the postseason. Because again,
Sure.
like his offense, kind of went by the wayside the title year as well, but he still played well enough to help them, help deliver them a title. He didn't
Sure.
just, he wasn't just along for the ride that year. He was really good. He was one of their driving forces. He made, one of the signature plays of their title run, right, where he got the steal from a Booker or whomever, right? And then he got the lob
Yep.
to Giannis, right? So I mean, that basically won them the game,
Pretty much.
um, and essentially the series. So I mean, like you can't discount something like that, right? Because again, we talked about it. There were a ton of teams that we thought it made sense, but like you said, for Portland, I like it a lot for Portland now. Even more than I already did, because I mean, essentially, you take what we already mentioned that they got for Holiday, right? With Robert Williams, Brogdon, who you could flip down the line, and a couple picks, right? And then obviously the Milwaukee and Phoenix return, right, where they got Aiton,
Mm-hmm.
and they got picks as well, right? So like that's really good. They basically got two good young players and multiple picks. And I said that's the one young good player in picks, right? I think that was kind of like the baseline for what you would like to do, but I think they exceeded that. So again, that's kind of why patience pays off because you just never know because sometimes another team could snipe in with a better deal, and if you're Miami now, you're really in a rut. Because you missed out on a number of guys. Even before Lillard, right? Because they were rumored with to get. They were rumored with Beal. Before Durant went to Phoenix, I think he was rumored. To be interested in Miami.
Yeah.
And again, like countless other guys as well, right? Obviously, Drew Holiday. But
Mm-hmm.
they didn't get any of those guys. So like they're in a real rough spot now for them because while Boston and Milwaukee are gonna kind of I think battle it out for supremacy in the East. Miami's window, you almost feel like if they don't do something soon, their window might be closed.
That's why we were
Just because
hoping they would get Holiday.
right, yeah, because again they already lost a couple of guys and didn't replace them with really anybody, and not to mention the team, the two teams that they're battling in the same conference got better, or at the very least got guys that are better than the guys they have. So,
Right.
that's pretty rough. For Miami, continuing to have I think a really tough off season. And I don't really know what another move for them is because I mean there's not many guys left at this point. I mean I guess maybe Harden, but it didn't sound like they were interested in Harden. And,
Mm-mm.
personally, I would have preferred Holiday over Harden, for the Heat.
Mm-hmm.
But, I don't know what's left for them at this point. They might
Yeah, I
just
think
roll
they're
into
out of the picture.
yeah, they might just roll into the season basically with what they got. And, maybe they'll stick around. But I mean, again, they were, a play-in team last year and, to me have gotten worse. So, I mean,
Yeah, they're not good. I mean, like they're good, but they're not good anymore. If that
right.
makes sense.
It's
Like,
going to be tough for them, I
yeah,
think, to get out of the East again or
yeah,
make it
their
deep.
Cinderella mojo's gone out the window. I
Yeah,
think.
because now you're more likely to face, one of Boston or Milwaukee in the second round, because
Sure,
in order to get out of the East, you're probably going to have to take down both of them. And I think that's a really rough ask, if you're Miami, because again,
especially with how
they
good they got.
right, yeah, because they were able to skate by a little bit with the Milwaukee thing, with the Giannis injury last year, even though again they still won, but now if assuming those two teams are healthy, they got better, and Miami has not. So,
Right.
um, big picture, right? We love it for Portland. We pretty much love it for Boston. And like I said, that adds on to the really good offseason they had, and I think it makes it better. Because now I'm not as worried about the Porzingis stuff now that you got some other pieces as well. And then for Miami, that's kind of the biggest loser of them all, right? And again with Portland, you got a good return, you got a really good haul for Damian Lillard, and
Yeah.
in a way, he's really good. So that's kind of how it should work. Where you give up a guy like that and you get a good return. So now if you're Portland, your rebuild is basically set.
Yeah.
Because all you have left to maybe move is Brogdon. But even then, outside of that, right? Like, I mean, regardless, well done, job well done. I mean, like Portland really deserves, a lot of all the credit in the world for what they were able to pull off because it's not really easy, to handle a trade request and actually get, really good stuff back. Because we've
Yeah.
seen teams, kind of forced to just give up guys, like and sell low. Like I think Phoenix kind of sold low on Aiton, even though he's not in the same tier. But we've seen, star players in the past get traded for, kind of weakish returns.
Wizards,
But this
Beal.
is a really good return, I think.
Yeah. Like
Again,
it's a
like
far cry from, some earlier trades like Wizards,
right.
with Bradley Beal. That was, this is like the best haul that you could probably get for Lillard at this
Right.
point,
Yeah,
just
'cause,
looking at it.
yeah, because like with Brooklyn, they got back a decent haul for Kevin Durant, right? Because they got Bridges, they got Johnson, and they got a boatload of picks. But Portland, I mean, Lillard is not the same as Durant, but you got a haul that I think you can kind of tout and be like, yeah, we did a really good job.
And they're
Um,
protecting their future too.
yeah,
I think the picks
exactly.
are
Yeah,
very underrated. Like they got
right. 'Cause
first
you
round
got
picks in 2024, the
right.
2029 one, then the another 2029, and then pick swaps in 2028 and 2030. That's a while from
Right.
now, but they're
Yeah,
protecting their
and
future.
yeah, and like one of those picks has a high, has well, I don't know if high is the right word, but I think the Milwaukee pick has a decent chance of being good, only because by that point, Lillard's probably done. And obviously that Milwaukee core will either be very different or it'll be just completely crushed.
Sure.
So I mean, other than Giannis, right? Like, because everybody else will have probably aged out by then, right? Like Middleton, Lopez, because again, that's 6 years from now, right? Whereas with the Celtics, Tatum and Brown in 2029, like they'll have basically just reached their 30, early 30s, right? And that's the core. But,
Hmm.
either way, it makes sense to get picks way down the line as opposed to, pick within the next couple of seasons because those two teams in theory should be pretty good,
Yeah.
for the next few seasons. So,
Yes, sir.
and, with Holiday now, I think, the idea behind trading him is similar to Porzingis. You give him an extension, right? Because I think he's got 2 years left. The second year being a player option, if I'm not mistaken. But now I'm assuming they'll give him an extension, and now they pretty much have their starting five, group locked up or locked in, for the next, several
Yeah.
years to come, pretty
It'll
much.
be
So, like
summer
I
of
said,
2024 is when he's a free agent, I believe.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, so basically, again, you got a bunch of guys and you improved. So like I said, hats off to Boston. They did really well.
Yes,
Hats
sir.
off to Portland. They did really well. So and again, like I said, Portland could get something else because somebody might, I'm sure somebody would want Malcolm Brogdon, right?
Yeah.
Somebody who missed out, on the holiday Lillard sweepstakes, I'm sure would be like, hey,
Yeah.
maybe we can give up, a little bit less to get Malcolm Brogdon,
Yeah. I don't
like
think this is the last we've heard of this trade, honestly. I
right,
think there's going
yeah.
to be a couple more moving parts.
Right, exactly. And again, even down the line, like you never know. Maybe Robert Williams, maybe probably not now. I think they'll look to keep him for now,
I
but
think they want to pair him.
right, yeah, and that'll be intriguing because Williams is more defensive minded, Aiton is more offensive minded. So I think that's an intriguing pairing. And to pair that with the guards, the athletic players for Portland like Scoot, Shaden Sharp, and Simons. Portland I think will be a really exciting team this year. And then again, Jeremy Grant, that's another guy where not right now, but down the line, somebody else could trade for him. So Portland
Yeah.
set themselves up fantastically. It's
Hmm.
kind of intriguing because I think Portland took, a beating for the most part. I know this is a different front office, I think, but for a long time they had taken a beating, for not putting great teams, around Damian Lillard. But of course, you know, once they get rid of him, then they end up doing about as good of a job as you could have hoped for.
Because
So
the
I
best
think
one
they
they
just
had was like what, McCollum and Lillard, and then I guess Aldridge maybe. I don't remember. Like that's how
right.
forgettable those squads were. I'm not
Yeah,
gonna
and
lie.
Aldridge was way before Lillard. I mean,
Hmm.
he was already there, because they had guys like Batum, Aldridge,
Yeah. I
Lillard. So
think
they had
yeah, that was like his rookie year though, so that was a long
right,
time ago.
exactly, yeah. And then they had the one that got to the conference finals, when they lost to Golden State when Durant was hurt. But I
Hmm.
think Nurkic was also hurt because that was when he broke his foot or whatever.
Hmm.
But that team got to the conference finals.
Right.
'Cause I think that was when Lillard hit the game winner against Oklahoma City,
Yeah.
right? Or
Yeah.
no, I think
Oh,
or was that a different year?
I think that was the same year.
Okay.
Could be wrong though.
That was 2019.
Okay.
Yeah, I think yeah, so I think that was it. Yeah, that
Yeah.
was the same.
Pretty sure it
So,
was. Yeah, that's a
yeah,
horrible shot.
yeah. Yeah, that was yeah, that's a good quote. So yeah, like I said, I think if you're a Portland fan, you should be really happy and I think really excited by, the prospect of what Portland was able to pull off,
Hmm.
with this team. Because again, they have a lot of options, they have a lot of athleticism, they got a lot more youth now, they have picks down the line. Like I said, they pretty much checked every box, for, a superstar type return. Can you get this? Can you get this? Can you get this? And they got everything. Like I said, they
Hmm.
got young players, they got picks, they got movable contracts. So, like I said, pretty much that completely shifts their offseason for me because I think when we initially talked about them, this was before the Lillard trade.
Way
uh,
before.
we had them ranked really low, and I think we had them as like a kind of a loser,
Yeah, we did.
of of free agency at that point because I think the hope that Lillard had was, hey, maybe we can get some free agents, even though we knew that wasn't going to happen. But either way, they did everything we basically said they should do. Trade Lillard, get what you can for him. We thought it was Miami, but only because at the time it didn't seem like any other teams could realistically pull it off. But,
Right.
I said they pulled it off. So hats off to everybody involved, because they did a good job, I think. Pretty
For
much
sure.
everybody, can take something from this and, leave, I guess, with some type of smile. Maybe Phoenix doesn't have as big of a smile, but I think, again, getting rid of Aiton, moving on from that, I guess for them, they still see that as a positive. Even though, like I said, that part of the deal I'm the lowest on in terms of Phoenix, but I like everything else very much.
Yeah, same. I'm with you.
Yeah. So now, we're gonna get into, the next couple of teams that we're gonna talk about. So we're still in the Southeast Division, right? This is the last division. Of course, we talked about the Heat last episode. But now we're gonna start off with the Charlotte Hornets. So,
Okay.
obviously the Hornets didn't really have a whole lot to write home about last year. I mean, they were awful. They were one of the worst teams in the league. Um, it is kind of interesting, how they, how I don't want to say how far they had fallen, but it wasn't that long ago, a couple seasons ago, right, where Lamelo was an all-star, basically at 21, which doesn't happen a lot. I know he was an injury replacement, but still, to be named an all-star, at that young of an age, that's an accomplishment. Um, and then in addition to that, right, they had back-to-back play-in trips. They got obliterated in the play-in, but you felt like there was some type of potential with the roster, but then just, everything went, completely south, right? You had Miles Bridges with his suspension, with his off the court stuff. You had guys like Gordon Hayward, LaMelo Ball, Terry Rozier, just everybody had to miss significant time
Mhm.
due to injuries. They finished 27 and 55, which was 14th in the East. They had some lottery luck, right? Because they jumped up to the number 2 pick. And they used that pick, to take Brandon Miller. Which again was kind of a controversial, polarizing pick, right? A lot of people thought they should have taken Scoot, but again, he's a tall, athletic, skilled forward, and and players don't come along like that, too often. So you can't hate the pick, I don't think, because I think he'll still be good.
Yeah.
Um, but I think the thing with Charlotte is I feel like talent wise, I think they're a little bit better than the record would suggest. We've kind of talked about this before,
Hmm.
especially now that they got some of their guys back, right? Like we'll see what Lamelo Ball does. He just signed a new, huge $200+ million extension. Miles Bridges has returned. I think he'll miss the first few games of the season, with that suspension, but when he was on the court last, right, he was averaging 20 a game, providing some pretty solid athletic plays out there. Brandon Miller, right? I'm assuming, those two guys will play together. I do
Hmm.
wonder what happens with Hayward, in terms of his starting spot, because he's on he's in the last year, of that big deal that they gave him a few years ago. Um, so I do wonder if he starts, to start the season and then maybe one of either Miller or Bridges comes off the bench. I'm not
Hmm.
sure.
Right.
But you do have a lot of flexibility there from that forward spot, right? Obviously, Terry Rozier is the other guard next to Lamelo, right? Any type of guard I think can fit alongside Lamelo, just because he's tall, and he can do a lot of different things, offensively. And then after that, right, Mark Williams, right, that was their center they drafted last year. I think that was a good pick. He
Very
seemed
great pick. Yeah.
down the stretch of that season he played really well.
Hmm.
Um, and then after that, right, you look at the bench guys, PJ Washington, right? That's a guy that I think has had a decent career so far, right?
Yeah.
They signed him to a decent contract extension that's, pretty inexpensive, for what he is, right? Kind of a guy that, can stretch the floor as a big, right? Decent athlete. Um, but then after that, then you look at some of the other players, on their team, and there's not a whole lot to write home about. With the other guards, right? Guys like, James Booknight, right, who so far hasn't really, panned out as a lottery pick.
Sure.
Bryce McGowan's right. He was kind of a bright spot for them last year, and they gave him an extension. We'll see. They drafted Nick Smith Jr. As well, right?
Yeah.
And again, another scoring guard, right? We'll see how that pans out, right? Frank Ntilikina as a backup, for defense. He's always kind of bounced around. Um, Nick Richards is another backup big. Again, fine, right? Nothing wrong with that. And then a couple other guys, Cody Martin, right? Caleb Martin's twin brother.
Hmm.
Um, again, fine, okay.
Not
And then after,
horrible, but not
yeah,
great.
and then JT Thor, another athletic
Great.
forward, and then Kai Jones, right? Who of
Oh
course,
boy.
if you hadn't heard about him, he's going to be away from the team for a little bit, because of some personal stuff going on. Obviously we don't know what's going on, but either way, we do know that he's going to be away from the team for an undisclosed, an unspecified amount of time.
Yeah.
So, but either way, he wasn't necessarily like, a big time star for them or
Yeah.
anything. But, he did provide something in terms of some athleticism, and some highlight reel plays. I think, we saw him in the summer league, right? He's the guy that dunked on Wenbanyama.
Yes,
So,
he did.
uh, right. So, like I said, I like a number of guys on this team, right? I mean, like I said, I like Lamelo. Even though I
Sure.
think the last couple of years, his stock has kind of fallen, because of the injuries, and I think also with the team not being as competitive, I think his effort, especially on the defensive end, is hasn't really been there. Hopefully those habits haven't been bad habits that he's been building because he'll need to get those back, if they want to win some more games. Um, Rozier, he's okay. Again, I like the forwards, right? Miller, Hayward, Bridges. And I like the bigs, with Williams and Richards. So either way, I mean, they do have a lot of size. They have skill. They have athleticism. I still don't think they're going to be like a playoff, you know, competitive team or anything like that. But I do think that they will be a much better, like, more competitive roster. So I
Hmm.
think they'll be better. I think they'll be better than 27 and 55, assuming they have good health. Better luck in terms of injuries because they were hit hard with that last year. I mean,
Sure.
it was just absolutely brutal. I mean, LaMelo Ball played 36 games. Gordon Hayward played 50 games, right? Bridges didn't play at all. So I mean, again, those are key guys, that played very little basketball for them last year. So I mean, um, it's just rough, but I do think that they will be better this year. I think Brandon Miller will come out of the gates and play well. He may start off a little slow, but I think he'll have a good rookie year.
Hmm.
Um, and I think he'll be that missing forward piece that they need. It's just a matter of, again, can they find some way to defend? Because they've been so terrible on the defensive end of the floor. And again, like just that's the main thing. Because I think offense, I think they're pretty much set. Because I think they have a lot of flexibility in terms of what they can do on the offensive end. But can they take, that next step on defense? If they can do that, then they could potentially get back to that, maybe that play-in spot. But it's going to be tough because there are other teams that I think probably just have, a higher floor than Charlotte just because, they have, a little bit more, I think, recognizable or just like, better baseline talent. Like say Chicago, right?
Hmm.
They got DeRozan and Levine and Vucevic. So like, that will probably still be enough to win, a few more games than Charlotte. Maybe not a whole lot more, but either way, I think that they should at least compete for the play-in. If they can compete for the play-in spot, I think that's a successful season for them. But again, it could go a number of ways just depending on the injury stuff because it is real with LaMelo because he's missed a lot of time so far, during his career in the NBA. And, if he misses a lot of time, along with other guys, it's going to be rough. So, like I said, I expect them to be better. I think that they have more talent than people are, than people think that they have. But, it could also just go horrible just if a guy's missed a bunch of time. But I'm assuming they'll have better luck. So I think they'll be a lot better this year.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it's kind of funny. Like a couple of years ago, I used to think of this team as like, what Memphis is right now. I thought that they were going to be the next team up in the East, if that makes sense. I thought the pairing between LaMelo and Bridges was phenomenal. I thought they were starting to form kind of like a Showtime budget, like
Yeah.
identity. You know what I mean? Like we know
Yeah.
Memphis has that two-way grit mentality and identity, but I was thinking that they were going to form some sort of identity. Then everything kind of just fell apart. Some draft picks didn't pan out. The Hayward deal has not aged beautifully, I don't think. But overall, I think their future is looking better than it did last season. I think, they have some things to be looking forward to. I think, LaMelo being somewhat healthier than last year, I think will hopefully be something to look forward to. Miles Bridges coming back. They drafted a couple of guys that I think may or may not pan out. Obviously, Brandon Miller, I think that's a great pick. I would have preferred them pick Scoot, but it is what it is. And I'm just expecting internal development here and just guys to be playing at the level that they know they can play pretty much. You've said it multiple times already. We already know this team can be way better than what their records and statistics show sometimes. So I'd like to actually see them play and live up to their full potential. But for their off season, I'm not really sure how to grade this because
Right.
there was a lot done, but at the same time, it's not really going to amount to anything. That's kind of the way that I'm feeling about it.
Yeah. I think, and we'll get into the grade in a minute or so,
Yeah.
because I do think like, there's a lot I think to like about the roster, but there's also some question marks. I think
Hmm.
some of the other guys, that they picked, that were lower picks, I'm not sure just because other than Lamelo, right, the other guards that they drafted just haven't panned out. And I think ideally, you have that forward, but the only other thing you really need, is can you find some type of decent two-way guard to play alongside Lamelo? Because I feel like Rozier, offensively, that's fine to have him play alongside Lamelo, but I think defensively is, you'd like somebody, a little bit better. He is small. And he's, now what, just about 30, on a
Hmm.
long-term deal, right? So how does he age on that deal?
Do you think
Um,
Charlotte maybe pursues like a Brogdon per se? I don't know. Do you think that would? I
Probably
don't. I
not.
doubt it though.
Yeah, probably not. Only just because again, like, does it really help you that much? I mean, I guess it could, but I would think Charlotte may prefer to go with a little bit more youth.
Mhm.
Because I don't think Charlotte is a team right now that should be doing something where it's like let's make a push for X, Y, and Z because they're
Sure.
still kind of in the rebuild phase. I think, especially because again, a lot of stuff happened to them last year, so that's what I'm thinking. But I do wonder if somebody like a Hayward, what do they do with his contract? Because it's like he's at a point now where he is what he is. When he plays, he's fine, but he doesn't play a whole lot. Um, and I don't think if you're Charlotte, you want to keep paying him, a decent money, down the stretch. So I wonder if he's a guy, that he's either some type of trade or buyout candidate. Probably not buyout, because I think they've
Trade for
changed
sure though.
the rules in the CPA where it's like, if because we talked about this in the previous episode, where like if you get bought out and you make more than I think the mid level, you can't join teams that are in that upper tier apron or something. And
Right.
that's usually where those type of guys would go. They wouldn't normally just go from a team like Charlotte to a team like, Houston or something like that. Normally they would go to a contender.
Right.
At the same time, who's going to trade for that? So, because he makes, I think, what, like 30-ish million. So, I mean, I don't see a team doing that unless it's like some type of salary dump where it's like he's on the last year of his deal. We have some contracts we want to get rid of. We think he could help. But I don't know. So that's the thing. So he may just kind of be stuck there and he may just have to wait until he's a free agent, to make a decision on something. But, either way, I don't know. Like you said, I guess now we might as well get into, kind of the grade thing, for Charlotte. What would you give them for this offseason? Because like I said, I think there were some positives, but again, I want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, it's really hard to grade this one, but I'm probably gonna go either a C or a D.
Okay.
It's really tough because I do like parts of the draft, but I also don't love some other parts of the draft. And I do like the roster as a whole. I think the forward depth is phenomenal. It's definitely a little bit underrated in that aspect, but outside of that, I do like Brandon Miller. Obviously, I think that should, bolster their grade up a little bit, but everything else kind of drags it down. They didn't really do too much in the free agency market. They kind of waived some guys and then signed just some, I don't know, just some names that I'm just not even familiar with, and I don't think that's ever really a good sign. And then, some of their other draft picks like Nick Smith Jr., I don't know how much of an impact he's going to have. And these are all guards, FYI. So, and Amari Bailey as well. And you already have, two point guards that I think people respect and would consider decent players in LaMelo Ball and Terry Rozier. So I'm not really sure what the plan is in terms of drafting Nick Smith Jr. and Amari Bailey, but it is what it is. And then signing Frank Ntilikina, I just not a big fan of this. So I'm probably going to go D.
Yeah, I think I might go with like the C plus ish range, only because I do like the Miller pick, even though again, like you said, I would have preferred Scoot. But I don't like, I'm not somebody where it's like, oh, there's how could you ever do this? This was like a terrible decision.
Right.
I mean, and again, maybe they will regret it. And because Scoot will probably be very, very good. Um, but like you said, the rest of the draft didn't really love that. You did get PJ Washington back on a good contract, so that's
True.
fine. You got back Bridges on a 1 year, I guess, prove it deal. Um, so we'll see what happens with that. But outside of that, that's the main thing. Like, you know what I mean? Because it's like it's. I think it's more so like I liked the Miller pick. And then it's like bringing back guys that you already had on
Sure.
relatively fine contracts. I think that's where like I'm okay with it being a C plus. Um, if they had had some better luck with the other draft picks, then I would have given them like a B or something like that. But
Right.
like you said, I don't care for the picks that they made after Brandon Miller because there were a number of them that I think they had that they just moved to other teams, right? Because I think like they drafted Mohamed Gai. I think was
Mm-hmm.
his name. I think they moved him to like Atlanta.
Yeah.
Um, and they drafted some other guys as well because they had a number of draft picks. I think they just moved them around,
Mm-hmm.
um, for other picks. But like you said, I don't care too much for the other ones that they made. And maybe they pan out, but we'll see. But you would think you'd have got at least hit on one off guard because they drafted so many of them, but so far none of them have panned out, right? Like, I mean, again, Book Night, we'll see what happens with Nick Smith. There are others, that off the top of my head I can't remember right now, but I mean, like, still, just like, you know, Charlotte's history of drafting hasn't been great. It's been better the last, few years for sure. Um, which is, but again, that's not necessarily saying a whole lot because they had a long stretch where, every year they just made, you know, just about as wrong of a pick as you could make, right? I
Yeah.
mean, like, for the last decade and a half, it's pretty much just been, just a lot of just bad. But
Sure.
I do think, it, now Jordan, I think, is a minority owner, right? No longer the majority owner. We'll see what Steve Clifford does. So it's a new era, I think, for Charlotte.
Somewhat.
And like I said, I like a couple of the pieces. But again, like I think the lower part of the draft is what prevents me from giving it a better deal. Because like I said, I like parts of it, but there are other parts that I don't like. So I think kind of just like a ho hum,
Yeah.
okay free agency, right?
It
Like not
bogs it
awful.
down though.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That bogs it down. I think they needed one of those, holy crap, like late first or early second round picks to really pop. I think for me to give them a better deal.
Sure.
So, I mean, I guess to kind of wrap up, just for like another minute, Charlotte. I guess which of the young guys do you think, not the rookies, right, but which guy that was already on the roster do you think may take like another step forward? I guess I guess since they also have some other young guys as well, I'll extend it to that. But like, outside of Miller, which other young guy on Charlotte do you expect to kind of like, break out and play really well?
That's tough because like I don't know, all these guys they're not superstars, right? And I feel like they don't even have that potential, some of them. I think they're more so like really, really good role players at the best. I mean, I liked Nick Smith Jr.'s game coming out of college, and I know he's a rookie, but he fell because he was supposed to be a like projected top 5 pick, but I think injuries and inconsistent play didn't help. Um, I would probably say either Miles Bridges or maybe PJ Washington. I'm guessing Miles Bridges because, I know he's not necessarily the youngest guy on this team, but I think him coming back and having something to prove and showing that he still can play basketball at the level that he was playing before he was out of the league for a brief stint, I think that'll probably push him to the edge and maybe push him into another tier of players.
Yeah, I think that's probably kind of just the guy to look at because I
Yeah,
think just having him back, as a guy, who was a good player, I think having that production back will help because like I said, they had a lot go wrong last year, and that was a big part of it. So we'll see what happens with that, but again, like we mentioned, this is a prove it deal for him because
sure.
he's on a 1 year. I think it's the qualifying offer or whatever it is. And so because again, he had a chance, to make a max deal, but he messed that up. So now, he has to kind of like, show what he can do. And maybe he probably won't get that money.
Yeah,
But
I
he'll have a
know.
chance. Yeah, but he'll have a chance, I think, if he plays well to get something. But we'll see. So yeah, I think
Sure.
him, maybe a Mark Williams. Depending on what his production, on the offensive end looks like.
Yeah,
Um,
that's why I was
Washington,
skeptical.
yeah, Washington, I feel like probably just is what he is. For the most part as a player, which is fine. But I don't know if he's
Who
probably going to be
knows?
significant.
That's
Yeah,
why I
I
was like looking around. I was like, I mean, all I can really say is Miles Bridges. I think everybody expects Lamelo to do that, so I'm not
right.
really gonna say
Yeah.
Lamelo, but I'd probably say
Any,
Miles Bridges just
any
due to
hope?
the incentive.
Yeah. Any hope you think for like a James Book night, or you think he's probably just
James Booknight may go down as one of the worst draft picks of all time. Just saying, when I saw him in summer league, it wasn't good, and I think you can agree with me. Like it was
yeah.
just a jack fest. Didn't look good, and I don't know. It's weird because in college I really liked this game. I don't know what happened. Maybe it's just
I
bad
mean, because
pairing, bad team, bad system. I don't know.
right, because I think he was a pretty high ranked high school player, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, yes,
So
he was.
yeah, he was drafted 11th overall.
Yeah, that's
It's
high,
rough.
and
Yeah,
he
and
hasn't done
that's
jack diddly squat yet.
right. Yeah, and that's the rough part because again, Charlotte has had some high. They haven't had like a lot of top five picks, but they have had a number of lottery picks, and you would just think, you got to hit on some of them, and like I said, they have hit on some of them, but
Like, bro,
not
this is bad. This is
enough.
bad. In
Yeah,
15 minutes per game, he shoots 35% from the field and 30 from three. That's
yeah,
bad, and that was last season.
right, and that was his second year. This is year three. And again, he played 10 minutes a game the first year, 15 the second year. So something's got to give,
On
right?
5 points per game. That's not good.
Right. Yeah, so something's got to give. Either he takes a step forward in that third year, or he just finds his way out. So
Yeah, hopefully it's
um,
not like a Killian Hayes situation, man. It's not what we
yeah,
need.
that one is also kind of rough.
Yeah.
But at least Detroit was able to kind of like make up for it by
Yeah.
having other guards,
Jaden
and that's
Ivey.
what you
Yep.
have for talent versus fit, because there's no guarantees sometimes. With some of these guys, there's only a handful of guys in the history of the draft where like they're surefire. There's no way they're gonna mess their careers up. You know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
so when you're in that position, that's why you always go for the most talented. You don't care. You don't worry about fit. Until you're at that point where you have to worry about it. And
That
Charlotte is
might be a mistake. That might
yeah,
be a mistake that Charlotte made with Brandon Miller. Just saying.
right, yeah, because Charlotte is not at that point yet. Like I said, I know they had the stuff with the with the play in, but they haven't been at that point yet. But then it's like you look at and again, like just to name some guys that were drafted after him.
Oh, Joe.
Again we got Josh Primo, who also found his way out of the league until recently, but
Joy.
for other reasons. Chris Duarte, Moses Moody, Corey Kispert, Alperen Şengün, Trey Murphy the third. Some of
Oh
these
my
names are
gosh.
pretty good.
Imagine they had Sengun. Jeez.
Right. Yeah, some of these names are pretty good names. I mean, like, but I mean, you ended up choosing, Herb Jones. I see in late in the second round. Again, like some of these guys wouldn't have gone,
You
like
wouldn't have
Herbert.
known. They wouldn't have
Yeah,
known.
like Herbert Jones wouldn't have been drafted that high. But
Sure.
just the fact that you're Charlotte and you got Book Knight, and then you have these other guys that are not that far off from that pick, and
Yeah.
those guys ended up being better. Like I think Moody is better than Book Knight. Even though he hasn't done like a ton, but I think he's better than Book Knight.
Yeah.
Pittsburgh, I think so far has been fine as
Yeah.
a player.
Really? You think so?
Yeah, I think he's been better than Book Knight.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Corey Kispert has been better than Book Knight, but I don't think he's
Yeah,
been good. I don't think.
I
But
think
that's
it's
just
I
me
think it's more
personally.
I think it's more so just he's got some, he's got an established skill
He's
set
just
as a
Joe
shooter.
Harris
You know what
2.0.
Yeah. But like what does Book Knight do?
He
Like
turned the ball over,
yeah,
shoot 35% from the field. All right, that's enough Book Night hate. But on all
right.
seriousness, like
Yeah.
it's really rough to kind of see a guy who is kind of touted as a scorer not be able to really score in the NBA. But some people don't transition. So
Yeah, yeah. That is kind of what happens because again, that's why the draft is kind of a crapshoot. Right before Book Night, was Zaire Williams. That's who Memphis ended up picking or trading for or whatever.
oh
And
yeah,
he's been,
that didn't
you know,
pan
he
out either.
Yeah, he hasn't really. Yeah, he showed some promise, I think, his rookie year, but outside of that, I don't think has
But
necessarily done a whole
those
lot.
guys
You
were hyped in high school, man. Like a lot of them. And it's kind of interesting to see guys who are getting millions and millions of views and clicks on, Instagram and YouTube when they're in high school and then they get to the NBA and they're, second round picks, undrafted picks or complete busts.
right? Yeah, exactly. So yeah, like I said, again, I think Charlotte will be better. I don't think they will be, a playoff team. Maybe they make a push for the play-in, but even that is, I think, is going to be difficult because I,
Right.
I think best case scenario they could be a play-in team, but it's going to be tough because there are other teams, and we'll get into one of them, that I think will be better. But to me, a
Oh,
successful year for Charlotte is try to see if you can compete for a play-in spot. You
yeah.
know, even if you don't get in, can you down the stretch, be like, oh, if we had just won a couple of games, something like that,
Just
as
play to your
opposed
full
to just
potential.
yeah, as opposed to like from the get go, it's like, yeah, you're destined to be like 8th or 15th,
Right.
So yeah, but that's my thing. I do expect Charlotte to be better. So I
Same.
think that there are things to be excited about for Charlotte. We'll see though.
Me too.
Um, Now we're gonna get into our next team, and that's the Orlando Magic.
Oof.
Um, so this is a team that I think there's different feelings on, right? Because again, this is another team, similar to Charlotte, that is undergoing a rebuild, with like
Hmm.
a youth movement. Um, and they have a number of promising players, right? Obviously led by the number one pick from the previous draft of last year, right? Paolo Banchero, who I think had a terrific rookie season.
Amazing.
Um, yeah, averaging 20 a game, 7 assists, just under 4 rebounds. Efficiency wasn't great, but again, as a rookie, it's like you don't really complain too much about stuff like that.
Right.
43 from the field, 30% from three, 74 from the line. But again, still just 20 years of age. I guess he'll be 21, when the season starts. So I think there's a lot to like about that.
Sure.
And he was on Team USA, so I think that experience should also carry over, right? Again, he's a big forward with size and skill all around. And it's funny because, I remember, when that draft happened, there were all those conversations about he's probably going to be like the third pick, right? Because, most people said Jabari Smith one, Chet Holmgren two, and Paolo three.
And
But
I
I
was
think
telling you he
Orlando,
was going number one. I
yeah,
remember that.
exactly. And I saw him, and when I saw him in college, I just felt like, how is this guy not going to go number one? Because he's
Yeah.
big, with a really versatile skill set. Um, but I think Orlando ended up, and again, this is so early, but I mean,
Yeah.
like, I still think Orlando made the right call taking him number one because I think he's going to be very good.
I think he's a
Um,
sleeper generational talent, if you want me to
y-
be
right.
honest. Like, but
Yeah.
very sleeper low key.
Of course. And with Orlando, they got a really interesting, team, in the works. It's
Yeah.
a team with a ton of size, a ton of versatility and length. I mean, you look at, down the line, Markel Fultz, right? Who's kind of, I think revitalized his career,
Oh,
which is
for
good to
sure.
see. After a pretty rough start to his career, that had injuries and, and all that other stuff. But, it seems like now he's kind of getting stuff under control.
Hmm.
Um, but Markel Fultz, right? He's a decent size for a point guard. Guys like Franz Wagner, right, who's basically 6'9", 6'10" as a forward, right? Paolo 6'10" as a forward, right? Wendell Carter Jr., right, 6'10", 270 listed as a big. I mean, like
Yeah.
this is a big team. This is a giant.
It's fire though. I love it.
Yeah, right. And again, Cole Anthony, Jalen Suggs, right? Other guys like Jonathan Isaac, who's trying to come back, who's had a number of injuries.
Yeah.
Chumo
Sorry,
K,
I was not laughing at his injuries. It's just there's a
right.
running, joke that we
Yeah,
have about him. It's just
right.
funny.
Chumo KK, who I didn't realize was OKK until I, watched the game last season.
I
But
always thought it was
he's
Okiki.
yeah, but it's OKK. And he hasn't really panned out. But Caleb Houston, a forward, right, 3-and-D kind of forward. But I guess the main highlights for their offseason was their two lottery picks. So they got one, that they drafted, that was their own pick, which was Anthony Black,
Yeah.
right, who's kind of a defensive minded guard, with some size. Obviously the shooting, we'll see, but I think he's got a really good floor game. And if he can figure out the shot, I think that's a really good guard, to kind of like, kind of like a, not saying he's Drew Holiday, but just like a guard that I think can play either guard spot.
Yeah, it's the
Uh,
prototype.
if yeah, prototype of that if he can kind of figure out that shot. But I
Hmm.
do like a lot of the other stuff like the intangibles, the defense, the work ethic, the competitiveness, and the length, and also like like I said, the floor game. Because in the summer league, he showed some really good passing. He played a
Yeah.
lot of point guard, like lead guard for Orlando in their summer league. So I like that pick. But then their other pick, that they used, which I believe was the Bulls pick.
Yeah.
They took Jet Howard. This one I was a little bit more confused by, only because he was kind of projected, I think, to go like, sort of like either late teens or like
Yeah.
early 20s.
I had him in
But they
early
ended up
20s, I
picking him
remember.
basically, I think it was 11th, right? Or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah. So basically right outside the top 10. Um, he's kind of, I guess, sort of like a scorer, primarily a shooter.
Hmm.
But I don't know. I personally don't like that as much as the Anthony Black one. And again, maybe he'll be good. Um, but either way, that's kind of the highlight of their offseason because the rest of it was just internal development from the young guys.
Right.
Other guys such as Mo Wagner, he came back. Obviously Franz Wagner's brother, right? Except he's a big man as opposed to a forward, a wing. Gary Harris is still around. They did sign Joe Ingles to, I think, a very random 2-year deal. Um,
Yeah.
I
Yeah, that
mean,
was a head scratcher, I'm not gonna
yeah,
lie.
that one was kind of random.
But hey, it
Um,
works.
yeah, 2 years, 22 million. And again, so that's not like it's bad, but just I thought Orlando was going to do something else with that one. I didn't really expect Joe Harris
They
to
could have
be,
done a little bit better.
yeah, signed Goga Batazde, former Indiana pick, to a minimum contract, right? We'll see what he does. Um, But like I said, the highlight is the draft picks. I guess, kind of talk to me, I guess, what your thoughts on their, draft picks were as
Sure.
well, before we kind of get into the rest of, the team as a whole in terms of their outlook.
Yeah. Anthony Black, I'm not gonna say a steal, but I think he's one of like the diamonds in the rough where, we're going to see him have a play style that we haven't really seen in a while, especially coming out of the draft. That two-way point guard is, I think, very rare. And like you said, it's kind of, Drew Holiday-esque. So I really like to see that. I think he's going to become a valuable asset for this team down the line. And hopefully can contribute, a decent amount to their win total and their win column because I think that's the goal of this team now. I think they formed this identity to the point where they're the young, up and coming team in the East, and now they need to get some wins, and actually look good because I think they have all the pieces for it. It's just a matter of timing. Now, Jet Howard, I'm not too happy with this one. You and I saw him play in the summer league, and we were kind of clowning him. I'm not gonna lie; it was kind of rough. It seemed like he didn't have a bag necessarily. I don't understand how somebody could be a scorer and not have a bag. So I kind of like to label him more of like a spot up player where, if he's wide open and there's nobody in his range and there's nobody to intimidate him, I think, he's going to hit the shot and there's nothing wrong with that. I probably would have liked to have seen them take somebody different. Maybe, Grady Dick. I don't know, but that's just me. I had them actually picking Grady Dick in my mock draft. I had Jet Howard in the low 20s, but nonetheless, I'm not super mad at it. It's especially if he doesn't, get an obscene amount of playing time, and I don't think he will on a roster like this where they're loaded at, guards and forwards. So nothing really crazy from them in their draft. I think it was one of the better drafts, of the teams that we've talked about. But in general, not too happy with the Jet Howard one, but overall, solid.
Yeah, because again, I guess the way you could look at it for Howard is, he is a 3-point shooter, and that is something that Orlando does need.
Sure.
So I guess, the thought process for them was like it seemed like they might have decided to just kind of like take guys, in terms of need more so than like the most talented. Even though,
Sure.
like I said, I like Anthony Black. Um, but that may have been what they were going for. Potentially, kind of like what Sacramento did last year, right? Where they took Keegan Murray,
Hmm.
with that pick, and a lot of people were like, what are you doing? Jaden Ivey's right there. But, he came in and he was really good,
Yeah.
for Sacramento as a rookie and helped them, make a playoff push, which is what they wanted to do.
And he was
Uh,
arguably better than Jaden Ivey. Just
right.
saying,
So
last season at least.
yeah, so that's what I think Orlando might be looking at, with this with those picks. Like I said, I like the black pick.
Yeah,
But at the same time, I guess it's like, you know, I think, like I said, I feel like this is sort of like just a fit. Because again, like then, but you know, like you said with Howard, they have a lot of guards and a lot of forwards.
Right.
So where does he fit in this rotation? Because again, like with the guards, like we'll look at the guards, right? They got Markel Fultz, Cole Anthony, Anthony Black, Gary Harris, Jalen Suggs. I mean, that's already five guards basically, and all of those guys could make a case for getting minutes.
Yeah.
Um, my guess is also like with the Anthony Black pick, it could be like one of those guards could be on the move at
I
some
think it's
point.
Cole
You know,
Anthony.
yeah, I think Cole Anthony is probably the one that makes the most sense.
Hmm.
Um, because I think I think he was in the draft before Suggs.
Yes.
So other than Fultz, he's like the one that will be the next one up to get paid.
Yeah.
So my guess is, and they're not going to pay all of them.
No,
So I
they
think he's
can't.
probably yeah,
It's going to be
exactly.
Cole Anthony. And I think Anthony Black is the best replacement for Cole Anthony.
Right.
I think Anthony Black gives you a little bit more size. I know probably less athleticism per se, but and probably less shooting as well. But Anthony Black adds that defensive, prowess that I really think they're missing on in some aspects on this squad.
Right. And then, you look at the forwards, right? And then you look at the forwards, again, Franz Wagner, right? Paulo,
Hmm.
obviously those guys will be the starters, right? And then you got, Jet Howard, Okiki, and then Jonathan Isaac. So, it's like, where do those guys fit in the rotation as
Right.
well? 'Cause Isaac played a little bit last year, I think, before he got hurt. And that's kind of been the story with him, for his career for the most part, is like when he's played, he's been fine, as a
Sure.
defensive minded guy. But the problem is he hasn't really played a whole lot. I mean, like, I think before he played last year, he was like in his early 20s, and then he comes back, after being out for basically 2, 3 years, and all of a sudden he's got a beard.
Yeah.
Like he
Yeah.
looked like a completely different
Yeah. It was wild.
guy for the most part. So I mean, that's kind of some questions I have. Is just what do you do with some of these other guys? But I don't think you necessarily worry about it right now.
Sure.
Um, because again, it's a young team, so you figure out what you got, you figure out which guys are most likely to stay and which guys are most likely to go. So I feel like, of all those guys, it's probably Anthony, that at some point ends up getting moved.
Hmm.
Maybe Isaac, unless, he can kind of find a way to get healthy again. Um, and then after that, you got a couple of, and then after that, KK may just, be off the roster, by the time the season's over when where they just maybe they just don't bring him back.
Hmm.
Gary Harris, I don't know. He's been a decent veteran.
Forgot he was
He's
on
kind
this
of
team
been able
too.
to make a comeback, after, injuries kind of derailing, what looked like a really promising start to his career.
Yeah, especially
'Cause
in
at one
Denver,
point
man.
yeah, because at one point he was the other guard alongside Jamal Murray, and he was, like the 3-and-D guy, that could also, kind of spot up and score at times. But injuries really derailed him, I think.
Mhm.
So, overall, I do like this Orlando roster, and I think this is a team that could be one of those surprise play-in teams. Especially depending on, which young guys take a jump. Because if Paolo, if he can get that jump shot better, where he's no longer like below 30% from three, um, and if a couple other guys, take a step forward as well, right? If some of those rookies have a decent start to their season, I think, like I said, I think this is a team that could, kind of surprise some people, like I said, and I think make, that play and push, kind of be in that tier, say like the same tier, say like Chicago, Brooklyn, maybe around
Sure.
Indiana, maybe slightly under them, something like that. They have a chance, I think, to make the play in. Um, like I said, I think a lot of it rests on the internal development of the young players. Because again, like I don't know how much the rookies will contribute this season. I think Black will be fine. I don't know about Howard, but again, like I don't think they're going to be franchise changing
They're
rookies. You know
not
what I mean? Like,
relying on them to be
yeah,
amazing this season. I
right.
get you.
Yeah, they're not those type of rookies. I think they could help, but they're not going to change the course of this team. Taking them from like what they were to like a perennial, like a big time playoff team, right? They're not ready to take that step yet. That I
Right.
think lies more so in the hands of Paolo. Um, but either way, I like the look of this team because I think
Me
again,
too.
you got a lot of size, you got a lot of versatility. The main concern I think is that shooting. Again, Jet Howard, so that could kind of determine, if he shoots really well, he'll get more minutes, for that squad because they don't have like a lot of great outside shooters.
But that
Uh,
lineup with him involved would have to involve some really like point of attack defenders because he
yeah.
can't defend a lick, at least from what I saw in college and the summer league.
Yeah, exactly.
Even
I
though he
mean,
did get a block, but it is what it is.
right, and even like a Paolo could, he could take strides on defense,
Oh, for sure.
down the line. So, again, it's a big giant team. Like I said, the main concern is that shooting. If one of those guys, like I said, Howard, can find that 3-point shot, or if one of the other guys that are already on the roster, expands that 3-point game, like a Paolo, or a Fultz,
Yeah,
or
false.
somebody like yeah, or somebody like that, I think that will do wonders, for this team. Because even Carter can kind of hit threes, at an okay clip, but still, you don't want him being one of like one of your best 3-point shooters in that starting five. Um, who do you think starts in that backcourt
Ooh,
alongside Fultz? Because
yeah,
I think that's kind of a question because again, they have a ton of options, at that guard spot.
right.
Um, but I do wonder because again, like I think Gary Harris was the starter
I was gonna assume
the
it would
last
be
season,
him.
but then he got hurt. And then didn't play it, and obviously didn't play down the stretch because he only played in about 40, 42, 48 games.
It
So I
wouldn't
mean,
surprise me if it's Suggs. I
yeah,
don't think it's gonna be Anthony Black. I think they'll
right,
probably look to use him more as the backup PG, hopefully.
right,
But I think it'll probably either be Suggs or Gary Harris. That's what I'm
right.
hoping for.
Yeah, that's
It
what I
better
think.
not
'Cause
be Jet.
no, I don't think it's going to be him. I think it's going to be either Harris or Suggs.
Yeah,
Only because I think they're going to try to give Suggs an opportunity because again, his thing is he's been hurt.
yeah.
So far in his career, he's missed a decent amount of time. Because last season he played in 53 games, and before that he played in 48.
Right.
So that's I think his concern. But I think when he plays, he's got some talent.
You can see
It's
it.
just again, similar to some of those other guards, he's not a great outside shooter. That's the issue for him because I like his defense, but the offense I think really does need some work.
Yeah,
Um, because again, like especially because if he's not going to be the point guard, then he has to be a better outside shooter.
exactly. So I
So
think they'll probably look to experiment with some things, but I think
yeah,
going into training camp, I think we'll probably see Jalen Suggs take over that starting role, and I wouldn't
right,
be mad at that at all. I do
yeah, if
understand that Gary Harris is making a little bit more money than him, but still, I think they're going to give him
right,
that opportunity at least for
yeah,
a few games.
if Suggs if Suggs' improvement as a shooter is legit, then I think he should probably get that starting job.
Hmm.
He
Yeah,
did
me
shoot
too.
better from three last year than his rookie year. His rookie year, he's
Absolutely.
21% from
Yeah, it was
three.
horrible.
Yeah, and this year it was 30, just under 33%. So
Right.
that's improved, I think. So if on basically four attempts a game. So if
Hmm.
he can get it to close to league average,
Yep.
if yeah, like if it's around where it was last year or better, then I think that's fine. Versus like if it's closer to 20 something percent, yeah, that's not acceptable. I think from a guard.
I'd also like to see him take care of the ball a little bit better as well. But,
Right.
hopefully if he's at the two, he won't be having to do as much playmaking.
Right. Yeah. So that's how I'm looking at it. So, and then again, like where does Joe Ingles fit into this? Because considering he was signed, to a 2-year 11 million, a 2-year 11 million a year, $22 million contract, you think he's probably gonna have to get some minutes as well.
I don't think he's going to
Probably
start,
not
though.
starting.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, he's not gonna start, but I mean he's gonna have to probably play at least some minutes.
yeah. Hmm.
He was on Milwaukee last year. He didn't play at the early part of the season because he was recovering from a torn ACL. He just looked like he might have been a little bit cooked. Um,
Yeah, it,
just
it wasn't
only
great.
yeah, just the age and the lack of quickness because he was a really good defender at his peak. But then and again, it's a tall task to try to ask somebody to guard Tatum and Jalen Brown. Again, especially coming off an ACL injury. But I don't feel like he can be that level of impactful player anymore.
I agree.
Um, so I feel like it's more so just like a veteran guy. Maybe some team will bite at the deadline or something. I don't know, but that signing made no sense.
Yeah, it's a weird one. Definitely a head scratcher, but I don't foresee him starting at all. I think he'll get, a decent chunk of minutes at some point, especially if somebody goes down, gets hurt.
Yeah,
But I'm really hoping
yeah,
for Franz Wagner to really, really
right.
turn up this season. I really need him to take a leap, bro.
I think that's the other young guy, other than Paolo, to that I think should be the expected to take a leap because he's pretty much gotten better every year. He's got a wide variety of skill sets. He was in, I believe, the World Cup,
Yes.
on the German team, right? So
Yeah.
I mean, that's the team that won it all. So I mean, and again, he was a big part of that. So, um, Again, 6'9", 6'10" or whatever, right? With a lot of different skills.
Hmm.
He can handle the ball, make some plays. He can defend. He's a decent athlete. I do wonder. And again, maybe it's too early to think about it, but he was the guy, that Orlando took. In Golden State, they took Kaminga. And I do wonder, if Golden State had a do over, right? Would they probably have, maybe have taken Franz Wagner,
If they could
as
see the future, yeah.
right?
I
Because I
think
think with
I think people really like Kaminga's athleticism for his height.
right.
I think that was the big thing. People didn't really consider Franz to be as athletic, but they did know that he could. He had a decent bag on him, but I don't know. There were some questions about Franz coming
Yeah.
out of the draft.
Right. Yeah. I think with Kaminga, the thought process was he's really athletic, just very raw. But if he can develop the skill set, he should be really good. And it's not that and I'm not saying he can't be good,
Right.
'cause he's still very young.
But Franz
It's
is
just
better right now.
yeah, exactly. And
That's your point.
again,
Yeah.
you look at what Golden State has done, with their draft picks in recent years. If you had a Franz Wagner, as opposed to a Jonathan Kaminga, right? That's a game changer because that's another young guy that you could have for cheap, that can really help you. But then, the biggest L taker and all of that is Chicago, right? Because I mean, that was the pick that came from the Vucevic deal. And,
Yeah, you're
again,
right.
Chicago had Franz Wagner. If they had taken them, I mean, their draft history has been, kind of mixed, but still, right? Like, I mean, I think a lot of teams would want him, in terms of his skill set. And I do think he's a guy that could take a big step this year. I think there's a lot of people that are really high on him. I've heard some people, I think I remember Kevin O'Connor of The Ringer. He thinks he could potentially be like close to a top 20 guy. Um,
You're
you
talking
know,
about Franz, right?
yeah, Franz.
Yes, I think he can be. I'm not gonna lie to you. Like, it's not some BS run. I think it's real. And like, if you watch the way that he plays, I think you can really see that he has a feel for the game that not a lot of these guys really have.
Right. Like, yeah, I do think, down the line, he could be really special. I mean, last year you're talking about 19 a game, 3.5 assists, 4 rebounds, a steal, 36 from three. That's pretty good. 49 from the field. I mean, so again, just a do it all type of guy. And again, it's not like he's, kind of like just a slow, slug out there. Like he's a decent athlete. He's
Yeah.
not like I think he's kind of like a sneaky athlete, sort of.
Yeah. I put him in the same tier as like Sengun. These are guys that I'm hoping to take a leap. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I need them to continue to get better, even though
Right.
they've already been very good.
What Orlando does this season, I think, will be predicated, on does a guy like him take another step forward, and does a guy like Boncaro take another step forward? I think those are the two guys where like, you need those two guys to get better. I think, and the better they are, the better this team will be next
Yeah.
season or upcoming season.
And low
Uh,
key, like looking at it, the entire roster is kind of like one of those teams where if everybody's playing well, there shouldn't really be too many crazy problems.
right.
They don't have,
Uh,
they're not loaded in terms of star power, but I think they're
right.
loaded in terms of depth.
Yeah. And then I guess, before we get into, the final grade and whatnot, do you think that there's still something left, with Jonathan Isaac, or do you think he might just kind of just be, kind of cooked? Because again, I do think when he plays, I do think he provides some value on the defensive end, and his
Sure.
offense was getting better. But again, the issue is that, you look at the games played. I mean, he missed back-to-back seasons. He was in the bubble. He only played 34 games that year. Then he got hurt, in the bubble, and then missed the 2021 season and then the 2022 season, and then played only 11 games last year and then got
Yeah.
hurt again. So he's not going to have too many more chances, before he might just, be off the team and out of there. Maybe another team will take a gamble because again, he's a tall forward, that's got some, really solid two-way things. But do you think there's still anything left? Or do you think, or is it more so just like he probably just is never going to be healthy?
Um, I'll say this. He's 25, right?
Yeah,
And
about to be
he's
26, I think.
Yeah, and he's already having all of these issues. I mean, since 2017 pretty much he hasn't, like, in 2017 he played 27 games. In
Right, yeah, that was
2018 in
year.
75. The most games that he's played is 75. So that tells me that there's a history there and it
Right.
probably isn't going to get any better, you know?
Yeah.
So
Right.
I'm not saying he's a bad player by any means. I think he's a great player. Like you said, when he's out there, I think he provides a lot on both ends of the floor. However, I'm not sure if he's going to
Right.
be playing a high volume of games next season,
Right.
and I
I think
highly
at
doubt it.
Right. I think at this point you probably have to expect that you're probably not going to be able to rely on him,
Right.
for most of the season. Because again, like you said, you just looked at it. He only had one season, where he was able to, play, the whole season, right?
Yeah.
75 games. That's good. But other than that, 27, 34, 0, 0, and 11. I mean,
Yeah.
like
11
that's
is rough.
awful. Yeah.
11
That's
coming off of an injury is horrible. That's my
right. Yeah.
point.
Yeah. Basically 11 games in 3 years. So I mean, that's brutal.
Yeah, that's not a good sign.
And then, then again, like then you add the bubble year, right? Then you're talking about, like 45 games in 4 years. So I
Sure.
mean, yeah. So I think, you're at a point where again, like, yeah, you're probably right, where he probably just is never going to be healthy.
Yeah.
And he was, I think, what was he? He was like the sixth pick, I think, in that
Yes. 2017.
2017 draft, right?
Yeah.
That was the what is it? The Fultz one, right?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's
That was
funny.
a
You do
that
have
was a hard draft.
two top five picks on the same team.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so yeah, because that was the thing with Orlando was they had a stretch for a little while where it seemed like they would have a decent pick, but all of the top guys would just be gone. Because in that draft, you had Fultz, who at that point hadn't panned out up until the last couple of years, right? You had
Sure.
Lonzo, who started out kind of rough and got better. Then you had Tatum, right? Who's obviously been great. Josh Jackson at 4, right? Who
Oh
has
God, that's bad.
yeah, by Phoenix, who hasn't panned out, and then De'Aaron Fox,
That's a
at
good one.
5 for Sacramento, and then Isaac, right? So I mean, and then after that, Markkanen, Ntilikina, Dennis Smith
Oof.
Jr., Zach
Oof.
Collins,
Oof.
Malik Monk,
Ooh,
Luke Kennard,
I like Malik
and
Monk.
Donovan and Bam, but still like Justin Jackson, Justin Patton. So like a lot, that draft,
Yeah.
had some good players in it, but also like a stretch where
That was
it
such a
was not
confusing
amazing.
draft. I remember
Yeah,
like I was talking to you, I was like, we gotta look out for some of these guys because they shouldn't have been
right,
drafted this low? Like I feel like
right.
it was loaded with hype, but I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah, and then obviously, like 2018, that was a great draft, right? That's Luca, Trey Young,
Oh yeah.
Aiton,
Yeah,
Jaren Jackson, right? But
yeah.
Orlando ended up taking Mo Bamba. You
Yeah.
know, yeah. So like,
That's
yeah,
right.
top 10: Aiton, Bagley, Doncic, Jaren Jackson, Trey Young, Bamba, Wendell Carter, Colin Sexton, Kevin Knox,
Oh
and then Cal Bridges. Um,
man, that kind
and
of hurts.
Right. So and again, you go to 2019, right? Same thing with Orlando, right? They took, let's see, if we look at that, Zion 1, Ja 2, Barrett 3, DeAndre Hunter 4, Garland 5, Culver 6, Kobe White 7. Oh, so they didn't even have a lottery pick in that draft.
Really.
Oh, they took OKK. They took OKK 16th because they made the playoffs.
Oh
They had that stretch,
God.
where they had like Vucevic and Aaron Gordon and they made the playoffs.
That's still
Um,
bad though, man.
yeah, so I mean, yeah, that's the thing is like they've had then they took Cole Anthony 15th the following year,
Not horrible.
uh, right? And then 2021, right? That was Suggs, and then of course last year, it was Poncaro, and then so I mean, and then this year was Black and Howard. So
I think they've
that's the
done
main
well.
thing for Orlando. But now they've had, they've been able to get some guys from other teams, right? Like they got Carter Jr. from Chicago. Um, they got Fultz, over from Philly. So, they've done a little bit. They've done better. And then obviously they hit gold with Paolo,
Yeah.
and Wagner.
Yep.
So, now it feels like it's getting better. But, it had a stretch where it was kind of rough.
It was
Like I
horrible
said,
for a long
yeah,
time.
'cause again, yeah, I mentioned those picks, and, going back to some of those drafts, it is intriguing. And it does kind of go to show where, like, you look at a lot of these drafts and there's always like a couple of guys that end up just not panning out. And
Sure.
then, like I said, there were some teams where, like, oh man, if we had just gotten one higher of a pick, we could have had somebody. Like say Orlando, if they had had 5 instead of 6, they could have taken De'Aaron Fox,
Right.
um, or something like that. But still, either way, still lots of different journeys, lots of different paths, and I think Orlando's on a good one now.
Mm-hmm.
So, to kind of like I said, wrap that up. What grade do you give Orlando for the offseason? Because again, a little bit of free agency because they had some cap, and then obviously they had a couple of lottery picks. So, what are your thoughts on that?
I'm thinking either B or A. I'm probably gonna go A. I think I'm gonna go A. I do like what they've done in terms of their draft picks. I think Anthony Black is a great pick. I think Jet Howard can pan out. I'm not as high on it as as Anthony Black, but I think he can add, like you were saying earlier in the episode, some shooting that I think they struggle with. And then signing Joe Ingles, that's a little bit of a head scratcher, but at the same time, I really like the fact that they were able to retain a lot of people, um, just keep guys around, and I just like the whole entire fit and look of the roster. It really just strikes me as one of the more underrated rosters that we've seen so far. And I really like the guard depth, and I like the forward depth, and I love, Franz Wagner. I mean, obviously Paolo as well. Just guys I think that are destined to take leaps. So I do like this squad a lot. I think it's really assembled very well.
Yeah, I think I'll probably give him like a B.
Okay.
Because again, I like Black. I like the some of the other stuff that they did. In regards to again, like keeping like you said the guards, and hanging on to some of those guys. Um, again, they most of what they did, other than the Joe Harris thing, was kind of just re-sign some guys, right?
Hmm.
Like they re-signed Mo Wagner. Again, I think that's more so just kind of like the family connection, which is fine. Um, Nothing necessarily wrong with that. But again, I think some people will be split on the picks because again, I think most people like the Black pick, but I think some people don't like the Howard pick as much.
Yeah,
Um,
I
and again,
don't.
he could pan out. That's the tough part with the draft is it's always really tough to figure out because especially once you get to the lower picks. As you get closer to like 10 and lower, where there's no longer like, as many like, oh, this guy for sure
There were just
has
better
got
people
it
on the board, though. Just saying.
right. Yeah, so because I mean, that's the main thing is, like it could pan out, but at the same time, again, I feel like ideally if you have a lottery pick, you'd like to have somebody, who's, can do a little bit more than just like, maybe one thing well.
Right.
But, again, he is young, so maybe he just potentially gets better. So, I think that's kind of how you have to look at it. But then with free agency, like, again, basically just Joe Ingles, like that's not really, something that I think is
All right, I'm
ideal.
downgrading to a B. You're making me feel horrible.
Yeah, that's the main thing is like I think the draft is fine. But I don't particularly care for what they did in free agency. And again, like the reality is they didn't have a whole lot of cap to work with. So they weren't really gonna get anybody like great. But I feel
Right.
like they could have done better than that. Like, like that was a team where it's like, hey, maybe they could have, gambled on Christian Wood. Obviously I understand, nobody did. So they could have gambled on some other young guy, as opposed to Joe Ingles. But at the same time, he is a veteran. Nothing wrong with having a veteran on your team, to kind of show, the young players some good things. So not a huge problem there, but that's like I said, where I probably would downgrade it to a B. I don't think it was a perfect offseason. But again, I think the picks, that's fine. Again, like you look at the other guys who were drafted after Howard, right? Derek Lively, Grady Dick. I think, that was kind of the one that we thought, would
Yep.
have probably been pretty good for Orlando. Hawkins, Buffkin, Cavante George, right? Hutch Scafino, Jaquez. By the time you get to those guys, right? Those guys weren't going to Orlando, just because, I don't think those guys would have been drafted very high.
Sure.
Whitmore was the one that fell.
Yeah.
Obviously because he went, from being potentially like a top 5 guy, he dropped all the way down to 20.
Mm-hmm.
So we were waiting for somebody to pick him up. I think I might have had him like kind of like in that Orlando spot, sort of somewhere, I think.
Yeah.
Like
I
in
had him
that
going to
5,
Detroit. It's rough, man.
yeah, something like that. So, but either way, that's how I feel. I think the offseason was fine. I think it's more so though the internal development of the guys that they already had. I
Hmm.
think the Black and Howard picks are more supplemental pieces. Where
Exactly.
they're probably not going to be like quote unquote stars, but they could help, this team, get better. That's
Right.
how I look at it. So
I
I
agree.
think in terms of their outlook, I think this is a team that could make, that could be in the play-in spot. You know what I mean? Like probably not like 7, 8, but the 9, 10 spot I think is doable.
Yeah, me
Just because
too.
they have a lot of pieces, that I think could, give teams a scare pretty much any night.
Yeah.
Um,
And then
the over under has
a couple teams are rotating out, of the standings as well. I think Washington will be rotating out.
Right.
teams will be moving. So I think their time is now.
Yeah, the over under has them at 36.5.
Oof.
They have, the Raptors, the Hornets, the Pistons, and the Wizards below them. So that puts them like at 11.
Hmm.
Um, and then right next to them, right, they have, like Brooklyn, I think is 36.5. So I guess, you know, do you feel higher towards say Brooklyn or Orlando? Because
Orlando,
okay,
100%.
okay,
I
that
think I
yeah,
think they're better equipped to have a better season. I think they're deeper. I think there's a little bit more talent, but there's also a lot more potential. I think Orlando has a little bit more potential than Brooklyn. I think Brooklyn is already like we already kind of know about everybody on that squad.
yeah,
We know their identity. We know what everybody on there is capable of. But in Orlando, we could be seeing Paolo become like a 25 point per game guy.
right.
Or,
That that's what
Franz
I'm
get
saying.
even better. Franz may jump up to like 25 as well. If they're both scoring
Right.
25, then the league's in trouble.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to kind of gamble and take, a bet on, the youth
Yeah,
potential, being better than Brooklyn, who may just be like, not that they're like completely maxed out, because there's a couple of guys that, could be better,
I
but
get it.
and I think we expect Brooklyn to take a step back, whereas Orlando will take a step forward.
Yeah,
Um, and like you said, if Paolo all of a sudden morphs into like a 25 a game guy and he's got, like an okay jumper, an okay defense, or if Wagner becomes like a 20 a night guy,
yeah,
or something like that, or again, one of those other guys, takes a step forward, right? Like that, I think gives Orlando a higher ceiling. Um, than a team like a Brooklyn or a Toronto,
absolutely.
or Chicago, right? Where, like those teams will probably be in a similar spot. But I think of those four teams, Orlando, I think is the one that's probably the most likely to be the best.
I agree.
Just yeah, like you know what I mean? Because like the other teams, I don't know, how you feel about like floors versus ceilings, but I
Hmm.
think Orlando definitely has a higher ceiling than any of those teams.
I think they have one of the highest ones in the East in terms of the young teams, and especially in terms of the bottom ones. I'm taking Orlando over a lot of teams people would not be happy about.
So I think I think that's how I feel about it. I think overall there's a lot to like about Orlando's
Yeah, I
roster.
love it.
Yeah, and their prospects going forward, just because again, like they have a lot of them, and and they have an identity, because like some of these teams are kind of like building their identity, so it's not there yet. But Orlando clearly has an identity of we are a big team with a lot of length and versatility, at different positions, and
Yeah.
again, I think that's a good way to go. If you can do it,
Yep.
you got to have the personnel, obviously, but I think they do.
Yeah.
So, now we're going to get into the news rumors. I mean, there's not really a whole lot. Obviously, we did talk about the holiday deal. The first one, Woj kind of hinted at the idea of, yeah, Portland's probably going to keep Robert Williams for now, which I think makes a lot of sense. And Brogdon is probably the guy that ends up, getting moved to another team. I think that makes sense as well.
Hmm.
Again, just because, Williams is young, Brogdon's probably better suited for a contender versus a young team.
Yep.
Um, then we had a couple other things. Milwaukee signing campaign. Personally, I'm not that high on campaign, honestly. Just not being mean or anything, but
I
like,
know.
I don't know. I've just never really been like a big fan of his. I know in Phoenix, he had the year when they went to the finals where he was pretty good, but outside of that, he hadn't really done a whole lot. I think, Phoenix kind of just moving him to San Antonio, I think probably suggests they weren't that high on him either. 'Cause, they could certainly use a backup point guard. But again, for a minimum signing, I don't hate it. I personally, if I'm Milwaukee, like, why not just keep Javon Carter,
Sure.
as opposed to
Good
having
point.
campaign? Because I think Carter makes more sense. Even though he's not like a quote unquote like scoring archetype, I think as a guy who can play off the ball as a decent shooter and certainly a much better defender than Payne, I would personally like that better. But he was also, in fairness, more expensive.
Sure.
Um, so I can understand that as well, where, you're already spending a lot of money on the team, with Lillard and Middleton and Giannis and Lopez all on big deals, and, even like a Portis or a Connaughton. So I get all that, but, again, it's a minimum contract, so I'm not going to complain a whole lot. Minimum contracts don't normally make or break a season. It's more so just like, an innings eater for the regular season. And, maybe he might have like a few games here and there where hey, they win because he had like a, 15, 20 point game or something.
Sure. I agree. Um, yeah, it's rough. I think we did talk about him going to Milwaukee potentially when it was first rumored that he was on the move, but it is what it is. I think, we already know what he is. He's a very
Yeah,
streaky player. He can shoot you
right.
into a game and win you
Yep.
a game, and he can also do, worse. He can do some damage to you
Yeah.
internally, and that's not necessarily the best guy to have, especially, if his minutes are very limited. I don't think he's going to be a starter, obviously.
Yeah.
Damian Lillard's there, but
Yeah.
even coming off the bench, like I would prefer them to have a more defensive point guard coming off the bench, more of a
Right.
traditional playmaker to kind of,
And that would
coincide
have been
with the
Carter.
yeah, to coincide with the second unit. I don't necessarily think you need a volume shooting microwave that can also have a tendency to go cold. I don't think that's the best commanding unit for your second unit, but it is what it is.
Yeah. In other transaction news, so the Spurs they bought out Reggie Bullock over the weekend, right? So obviously he's entering the free agent market.
Okay.
He's a 3-and-D guy, right? He was on Dallas. He had been in New York, right? He had played for the Lakers, I think, at
Yes,
one point.
yes.
Actually, I know he did. He was on the Clippers, so he's bounced around.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think he can provide some value, like I said, as a 3-and-D guy. I think
Oh,
as
for
a
sure.
minimum contract value, I think that's pretty solid.
It's a steal in
Again,
my opinion. He's
yeah,
a very good
exactly.
shooter.
Right. Yeah. Like, is he going to play it, as big of a role as he did in Dallas as a
No,
starter for a team? Probably not.
no.
But again, for a minimum contract, I think that's a decent signing. I'm just curious as to where he would go.
Denver
Uh,
needs to grab him now.
right. Yeah. Because I think that's, not that he'd be a quote unquote Bruce Brown replacement, but,
Yeah, that's my
again,
thoughts
as
though.
another 3-and-D guy you could put out there, I think that would honestly be a good fit. I hadn't even really thought about that, but I think that makes a lot of sense.
And they need to
Um,
do it
yeah,
ASAP because everybody's
right.
making moves around him. Just
Right,
saying.
exactly. Denver's a team that, I feel like got a little bit worse in the
I agree.
offseason. I think, again, not that Bullock is going to make or break your season, but I think that's a quality, signing to add to your team.
Yeah,
I think he can help a lot of teams.
it's gonna
Again,
put some wins in your column. I'm telling you.
yeah, and like yeah, sometimes he'll have games like he did for Dallas where yeah, he doesn't shoot very well, but he does defend. He's willing to pressure guys, at the point of attack, and he's got some size. And again, he's got some experience. He's been on some decent teams, some big teams. For Dallas, he helped them get to the conference finals.
Hmm.
So, and on a minimum contract, right? That I think is a way better, deal than him making like double digit money a
I
year.
agree.
So I do wonder where he goes, but I do think, yeah, Dallas makes a lot. Oh, not Dallas. Denver makes a lot of
Yeah,
sense. Honestly, Dallas, would have been okay as well,
yeah.
but obviously he's not going there,
Right.
because he got moved from there.
I
So
get you.
yeah. Um, Blake Griffin may retire. Brad Stevens reveals 6-time All Stars considering his options. Obviously, I don't think Boston will bring him back. I think they'll probably look to get a big man who's a little bit better. I mean, they invited Gabriel to training camp. We'll see what he does, but it sucks because he had a really good career, for a while, and then the injuries, unfortunately, I think shortened his
Yeah.
career because even when he was in Detroit, when he was a little bit older, he had gotten to the point where I'm no longer quite as athletic as I used to be, but I'm way more skilled.
Yeah.
I think he was able to do, maximize a lot of, what he could have done because, he
For
came
sure.
in as primarily like a, raw but very athletic player.
Yep.
And then over time, he got more skills. He got, better at ball handling. He got way better as a playmaker distributor, way better as an outside shooter, to the point where he was a good outside shooter. But the issue for him was the injuries, I think, because again, he had a stretch where he was one of the top players in the game.
Yeah.
Um, so that's
Especially
kind
on
of
Lob
unfortunate.
City, man.
Right, yeah, because this was a guy, that we kind of grew up watching. So now like, for the injuries to be the primary reason, to kind of put him down, that sucks.
Yeah, you never
Um,
want to see that.
right, yeah. So, maybe he might be able to get on another team as sort of like a locker room guy, but at the same time, at a certain point, the injuries do take their toll. So,
Yeah, it's very unfortunate.
right. Um, some more unfortunate stuff. So we got, some injuries, coming out of training camps. We had a few that we hadn't mentioned, in one of the last few episodes, right? Where I think Jose Alvarado, Larry Nance Jr., they're going to be out, for a few weeks with ankle injuries, right? That's not a great sign if you're New Orleans. Again, not a long time, but still, that's the team that's a team where it's like, hey, we've had some horrible luck with injuries. The last thing we want is to have guys get injured before they even start playing.
And season
Um,
starts the 26th, so that's not
right.
necessarily a good sign.
Yeah, and then, of course, your Wizards, unfortunately, they had a couple injuries, right, to Daniel Gafford and Landry Shamet. Shamet, I believe, broke his big toe, so he's going to
Yeah.
be out 4 weeks.
Yep.
Gafford, he hurt his elbow, so he's going to be out 2 to 4 weeks, and that one I think is more unfortunate
Yeah.
because we'll talk about the Wizards, soon, but they don't have a lot of bigs.
Yeah, we got Tristan
So
Vukcevic, I think, is our backup. So
right,
joy.
yeah, and then more injury stuff. So Draymond Green, apparently he had an ankle injury, where I think it said he stepped on Kaminga's foot, in a practice or whatever, and he's going to be out 3 to 6 weeks. So
Oh,
that one's pretty rough, depending on how long it is. Obviously if it's 3 weeks, if it's closer to three, he could be back, by the start of the season. But if it's closer to six, right, then that means he's going to miss a little bit of time. And I think that's one of the guys on that roster that you can't afford to have him miss time because he's basically the quarterback of their defense.
yeah.
Other guy that runs the offense outside of Steph. Obviously, Chris Paul, can handle some of the playmaking. Secondary playmaking
I'm
duties.
sorry. That's gonna take some god dang getting used to. I can't.
Yeah.
Oh my
Um,
gosh. Sorry.
yeah, but in a way that also potentially opens up an opportunity maybe for Jonathan Kaminga, right? Because again, he's a guy that, has just not been able to, make a meaningful contribution to Golden State, mainly in the playoffs. But even in the regular season, his minutes, kind of fluctuated a lot. So,
Yeah, they pulled
now
him.
he's in his third season. So, this is his time, I think, to kind of step up and show, that he deserves, to be a consistent rotational guy because that has not happened so far. Because remember, last year's playoffs, right? They had that story that came out after they beat the Kings where, like, he was amongst, several guys, who was not happy about the minutes he was getting. Um, so, hopefully he plays really well because
Sure.
if Draymond's going to be out for a little bit, they need Kaminga to play well because he's outside of Wiggins, he's the only other forward archetype that can kind of do that kind of stuff.
Right.
Again, he's more of a four, compared to Wiggins, who's more of a three. But still, they don't have a lot of Kaminga type players on that roster. For like the fours,
I
right? It's
agree.
basically him and Draymond, so they need him.
Yeah,
I
it's
think so. That's
desperate.
a pretty significant injury. Of course, like I said, it depends on how long it is, but that's again not a great start. But again, you do have Chris Paul for the playmaking.
Yeah.
So I think that obviously is set. But obviously you'll mainly miss him defensively.
Yep.
Because he's their best defensive player, pretty much, and their most versatile defensive player. Right? Again,
Yeah.
he's the quarterback on defense, so you're
And
gonna
they'll
miss that a lot.
yeah, and they'll be
So
missing him
hopefully,
for 2 weeks pretty much.
right? Yeah. So hopefully he comes back sooner rather than later. Because again,
Yeah.
the longer he's out, the rougher it'll be for them. I think
You
because
don't want
again,
to
they don't
miss
really have another
Draymond 2 weeks
replacement on
into the
the roster.
season. Don't want
Yeah,
him to be
exactly.
missing him. Yeah.
And that's going to put more strain, I think, on some of the other guys as well. Because, and again, that's the concern with Golden State in the sense of it is an older core.
Yeah.
Again, older guys, and although and they are older guys that are susceptible to missing time. Because
Yeah.
all of their core guys, you know, they could, have something happen to them and then they're out for a few weeks. And, so that's not a great start to the season. But, they do have Kaminga, so we'll see if he can step up because
Yeah.
if he doesn't, I think it's going to be a rough start unless
Absolutely.
Draymond comes back sooner rather than later, which hopefully he does.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that's pretty much it, for, today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, it was a big one. Because of course, you had the holiday deal, amongst other things. And, again, that Portland deal keeps growing and growing. So we'll see what happens. But let us know in the comments what you thought, of the holiday deal. Who you think is, like a winner or loser of
Mm-hmm.
that. What do you think of Boston now after the trade? What do you think of Portland with their Lillard Hall? Of course, let us know also what you think of, Charlotte's offseason. What do you think of Orlando's offseason, right? Are you higher or lower on them? And again, we continue to appreciate, the likes and comments and subscriptions. So hopefully everybody, has a great Monday and we'll see you next week.